Valerie has authored over 20 practitioner tools, webinars, and reports. She is the co-editor of the leading book about HR standards, Human Capital Management Standards, a complete guide.
Thank you very much, Zainab, and also a big thank you to Allah for a very interesting and thought-provoking and I think challenging talk as a part of this conference about the very exciting but also in some ways the rather not scary but challenging future that we may face with regard to learning and development in organizations. But I will just reinforce how proud I was to be part of the editorship, the writing of the book, the first book about human capital management standards, which, if anybody is interested, might give a good flavour, a good overview of the way that different forms of human resource management standards, international standards, can be applied and can add value to organisations. And I'd also like to say, I got involved in this work. I work in a university. I have worked in many organisations. I had a career in consultancy, but I made the switch to work in universities and to strive to become a professor because I was also curious. And my concern is to move practice forwards rather than for us to get stuck in what we can already do well. Because once we become complacent, that's when things can start to go wrong without us even noticing them. But my passion in my work at the university is to carry out research that can be used in a practical situation in organizations, and also to make sure that the research that I and others carry out is informed by the priorities of practitioners and of organizations. So that's my that's why I got involved in this about 10 years ago, and I have enjoyed working with many colleagues to develop the first international standard for learning and development, which is called ISO 30422. So I will just give you a very brief part of the background to the development of this standard. Khwaja Asaf gave a very good and insightful overview of how ISO as an organization has developed. And in some ways, human resource management standards, they're the new kid. It's about 10 years or so since these standards have started to be developed. And if you want to develop a standard, you have to convince ISO, first of all, that there is a need for the standard. And then when you develop the standard, you have to make sure that many voices are included and that there is an international consensus about the content of the standard. So in our particular case, it was quite evident that there was a need for an international standard in learning and development. As Allah and I think as Khwaja Asaf have identified, standards help organizations to work together better. I liked the example about paper sizes, about how we would be lost without standards. I always think about my mobile telephone. We so badly need standardization in the SIM cards and in the networks. And so this is part of the way that we can operate with others in an efficient and an effective way. And increasingly in organizations, we find that we have to collaborate. We have to engage in joint ventures with organizations in other countries, in other cultures, in other parts of the world. And so an international standard for human resource management, and particularly for learning and development, means that these collaborations and these joint ventures can be more efficient, and can be more effective. Otherwise, everybody does their own thing and then things break down. There is a gap. So in developing this standard, it was a great honour for me to be involved and to lead the process. 33 different countries from across, I think, pretty well all regions of the world had the opportunity to comment and to be consulted and to contribute to the development of the standard. And I learned a lot from the experts from 11 countries who continuously worked over a period of 2 to 3 years to make this the best standard that it could be. And we also benefited greatly from contributions from international global organizations, such as the International Federation of Trade, Training and Development organizations, and also from our European, in this instance, trade union colleagues. So that's a little bit of the background to the standard. And now I'm going to share with you what the standard contains within it. Now here, it is not a long document. Let me first say, sometimes you can look at an international standard and be very, very put off because it seems to contain many, many clauses that would take a lot of effort and bureaucracy to implement. So we made the decision with this standard that it should be accessible and it should be user-friendly to leaders and managers in organizations of all types and all sizes, whether they're non-profits or whether they're leading profit-making organizations. So we also wanted to make sure that this standard was as interoperable as it could be with other standards that organizations may already, international standards that organizations may already be applying. So if your company is already working with ISO 9000, for example, or one of those families of standards, then the ways of thinking for that process of standardization aligns perfectly with the ways of thinking that underpin this particular standard. And so we know that business excellence requires people in place with the competencies, with the motivation that Allah was just referring to. We know that companies have to invest heavily in learning and development, but until now, there's been no internationally agreed means to identify how best to make sure that those investments are used in an effective way. So this standard provides a benchmark standard against which you can judge and improve and assess the systems you already have in place, and then make the improvements that will enable you to move forward. But we are particularly keen that this standard does not require people to learn a whole new language of jargon. It is written in plain English. I will share with you, my friends, as well. We had a discussion at a recent ISO plenary about why the language of English had to be so dominant in standards. And wouldn't it be much preferable if we could have them translated into other languages? And that's probably going to be one of my campaigns for the next few years, is to try to ensure that standards can be made available, international standards, in the language of the user, rather than having to be available only in English. Now, the standard that we've developed, I said it aligns with the principles of other standards, and because we wanted to make this useful for line managers as well as leaders, we draw particularly on the well-established management mechanism of plan, do, check, act. But equally, this standard makes very clear that learning and development cannot and never will be a one-size-fits-all recipe for every organization. Every organization is different. Every company has a different organizational context. And so it is important that learning and development at the organizational, at the team, and at the individual level, as Allah alluded to, is aligned with the organization's priorities and with their strategies and with their operating environment. And it is also important that learning and development delivers, and it delivers at the organizational level through change readiness, through employee engagement, and through those other things that Allah has already referred to. So this is part of the continuous improvement process of the organization, and it constantly can evolve and develop. And if you're looking closely at my slides and you're smart, you will see, and I must make an apology here, that I have the direction of the arrow in the wrong direction on the relationship between organizational context and organizational outcomes. I noticed that this morning as I was reviewing my slides, and that is my error. So there's my learning point for the day, is to check my slides more carefully before I send them to my friends. So I will now provide a brief overview of what's really in the standard that can be helpful for managers and for users of the standard. As I say, this document is a useful document for all organizations, wherever they are headquartered or in whichever country they are operating. It provides plain language guidance around the plan, do, check, act procedure. So the planning stage provides guidance for the organization in how to prioritize and how to identify the important and urgent learning and development actions that need to be addressed and invested in, first of all. Regrettably, in life, not all learning is equally possible and is equally urgent. So linked with the strategy of the organization, this document provides managers with advice about how they can identify about those priority competencies or capabilities so that they can prioritize the need to do learning and development over the nice to do learning and development. So there is a useful section in this document about identifying learning needs at the different levels of the organization. There is also guidance on how to plan learning and development. Allah said something very interesting, I thought, in his talk, which is that learning and development is more than what happens in the classroom. And a criticism I would make of many organizations' training strategies, their human resource development, their learning strategies, is that they focus all their management attention on the expensive to deliver management classroom-based learning and development. And this means, as Allah alluded to, that maybe 70% of what people are learning socially is not managed and is overlooked. And so we were very keen in the writing of this standard to provide guidance about different ways of carrying out learning and development that do not rely all the time on the classroom. Sometimes the classroom is necessary. It may be an electronic classroom, but sometimes it's necessary. But in many instances, learning occurs outside of the classroom in the workplace. And this standard provides a means to help managers make decisions about the best way to enable their people to develop using the resources of the workplace, as well as the skills and knowledge that may be held by other employees or by others in the ecosystem. suppliers, people in the supply chain, and so on, that we can learn from in the broader environment. In this document, there is, I think, a useful and short appendix that provides guidance about some of the different ways that we can exploit the social learning processes, such as buddying systems and mentoring. Now, I'll move on quickly because my time is limited. The standard also provides guidance on how organizations can then deliver on that plan to implement their learning and development, and importantly, to make interim assessments as to how well this is going. Because sometimes with learning, we have unanticipated consequences. So assessment of learning on a continual basis is identified as important in this standard, and is something which is often overlooked in organizations in order to put right or to put things back on track where there might be some variation on what the plan initially was. And then, of course, finally, the importance of evaluating the effectiveness of learning and development outcomes. And here, like with learning 70-20-10, the standard is also clear that much assessment, much evaluation can be achieved through using metrics, through using measures, through using data analytics. But an important feature of the assessment and evaluation of learning is actually those subjective experiences whereby we learn through maybe a water cooler conversation or through some text-based chat, how useful some particular learning feature was, but equally how something else might need to be further addressed. So I will summarize now and perhaps try and explain to you why I am so enthusiastic about the work that has been done on this standard and why I am so proud of the standard. I think it is the most useful document for organizations who really want to ensure that their learning and their training and their development can be and is working as well as it should. As we invest more in learning, we need to be really certain that we are getting maximum benefit for that investment. So my view is that this standard provides for a benchmarking process, a health check of the learning system in any organization. It also provides know-how to help managers and learning consultants consider how to improve underperforming parts of the learning system. I think it's a really useful tool to get people going if they want to start over with learning in their organization, but they do not quite know how to start. And I think it also provides a means whereby an organization could assess how it's doing against the standard. And when it's confident that it meets and applies all the guidance of the standard, it can celebrate and it can communicate to its staff and to its clients and its customers through an assessment and certification process that learning and development in this organization is top-notch. So my own view is this is a way in which the standard can help learning and organizations become future-proofed. It can future-proof the organization, and I also firmly believe that working in this way, it can future-proof the careers of people working in the organization as the world around us changes over and over again. So I thought for my last slide, I would just add a few comments about how people have responded to these standards. Now here, my friends, this evidence, this data, these illustrations come not from people who have applied ISO 30422. The reason is this is brand new. We are in this conference considering leading edge, cutting edge work. This standard has only recently been completed and published by ISO. But we've been very fortunate in the UK. We had a British standard, it's like the maybe the grandmother or the grandfather of this standard. In the UK, we recognised that we needed a national standard. So we did some work, and some of the insights from that national standard did inform the development work for this ISO standard. So these comments relate as much to the experience in the UK of a national standard, but I will share with you that the UK has now stopped its national standard and it has adopted as its standard the ISO 30422. And in fact, the picture I showed you earlier is of BS ISO 30422 because British Standards Institute have taken this as the thing they now want to promote and sell. So at an organizational level, we have evidence now that application of these standards can not only help with the customer perception of the organization, but has enabled organizations to offer a wider range of services and also to extend their reach more into other parts of their workforce, including their volunteer or internship workforce. The UK Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development are very keen on evidence-based, research-based human resource management, and they are very clear that they wish to be involved with standards because they're rigorously evidence-based. And finally, standardization bodies themselves, they have noticed that these standards provide the opportunity to raise the bar in people management, to drive quality and other performance improvements so that their client organizations can retain their staff, can build loyalty, and can build new business. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And I think I may have spoken a few minutes too long, so I do apologize for that. This is the passion that I have. So thank you again for listening. And I will try to say this probably wrongly, shukriya.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I think you said it perfectly, and no need to apologize for taking on an extra few minutes. I think it was very, very useful. I mean, it's always useful to know how to understand the people around you, improve the overall performance and management of people. I think every leader, and being an entrepreneur myself, I feel the same, that, it's how to keep on always improving and raising the bar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.